hello, wonderful friends. Guess what? It is Monday, which means we are back with another amazing episode of Pink Pixels. I'm so thrilled to be here each week. I know that we're in the second half of Monday, right? The sun, depending where you're at, might be beginning to set. It's at least past the halfway point. And so we see the rest of the week ahead of us at this point. We've got the chance to look at our calendars. We've got a chance to prep ourselves. And it's our chance to kind of also take a moment to breathe. I love that we get to be here every Monday evening at Pink Pixels to challenge ourselves. For some reason today, I was just thinking about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, right? That whole process where he takes his shoes off and gets into this opportunity when he relaxes and speaks to his neighbor, that it's about building community. And for so many of us, once we finish our day job, we hop onto our streams, our discords. It's our chance to reconnect with our own community. That we take our slippers off, we probably put on our sweatpants, we begin to relax a little bit more. But as we look at our community, we should see each person that we talk to, the people we see in our lobbies, the discords, the streams, the names of all colors that we see along there, that they are very much so our neighbors. All right, we're going to take a little bit of a vibe from Mr. Roger today and see the humanity that each of us brings, the perspective, the stories, and how much richer it makes all of our lives to learn more about one another. And I'm so excited that we get to do this every single week. But every week we have somebody who brings a new story, a new experience. And I hope that when you come here, you have an open ear, an open heart, and you're ready to engage us, because that's how we have community, not just being here, but by giving of ourselves, being able to talk and chat, of sharing what we hear, of being wonderful and kind community members, neighbors in this space, digital neighbors, if you will. So tonight, as I mentioned, always amazing guests, and tonight is absolutely no different. I cannot wait for you to meet her. She is an amazing powerhouse of a woman. So please, if you would all be ever so kind, help me welcome the amazing Shiew Yeu. Come say hello to us. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm saying hi from California, Bay Area. And this is the part of the year where we kind of have sunshine. Most of the summer is foggy land. And I am currently working at the senior outsourcing art manager at Riot Games. And I have been in the industry for almost 20 years. I started in 2004, and I started as a texture artist. And most of my career, I've been at The Sims. And this is from Riot Games, and the rest of this is Sims. I also work in the mobile game industry on War Dragon, and as well as Ember Studios from the service provider side of things. And video game is actually my third career. I started my career as a graphic designer in 1999. Couldn't find any job, and I went into the multimedia during the dot-com boom. And when it crashes, I went back to school for 3D, and that's how I got into video game after I graduated.
I love the flexibility and evolution. And you said all that, like, yeah, this was like natural progression. And I kind of like the physical journey you're giving us that we're going on to at the same moment. It's a nice parallel of what we're doing. But your journey has been nothing short of stellar. And it has been. I like that you mentioned, of course, that you've gone through kind of like three different evolutions at this point. Can you walk us through your journey? Because so many people are like, what's the pathway into gaming? And for so many of us, it's not like this was the straight pathway or it was just this easy. What was your journey as you kind of went through all of this, that, as you mentioned, like the dot-com boom,
Yeah.
starting in design, and the pivoting that you did time and time
Yeah.
again?
I guess the first part of your question is you can come into video games as anyone, as a writer, as a financial, whatever. There are people who do things that it's over my head what they do, security, legal. However, since I was young, I grew up in Malaysia. All I wanted to do is draw. And as a Chinese from a traditional family, it is frowned upon. So I had to go to America telling my parents, especially my father, that I'm learning computer, which was not wrong.
It's a partial truth. Yes. Smart.
But It was art, but I didn't tell him that. I actually didn't tell my father I was an artist until 10 years after I left Malaysia.
10 years. How do you keep it a secret? Like, yes, how's work? I looked at so many computers today.
And he knows is I do something with computer,
Mhm.
but he doesn't know what it is. My mom knows, but she said, "Don't tell my dad. Just tell him." And it took me 10 years, is because I had to figure out how to stay as an artist
Mhm.
and be able to pay my bill, not just drawing beautiful things, but things that actually generate revenue,
Mhm.
actually make sense to the world.
Yes.
And that took a long time. Graphic designer and web designer, it is a very and highly competitive job. And the first 10 years of the 2000, that was for economy meltdown.
Mhm.
And you didn't have another one until recently in the crypto crash.
Right.
But back then, it was every 2, 3 years there's a economy meltdown. So every time I graduate as a new with a new career, there was no job.
Great timing. Somehow you synced it up perfectly of like you're going to have the worst luck.
But I survived by doing a lot of contract work, a lot of freelance work. I have to thicken up my face to go market myself. I work at
Mhm.
the printer in order to survive. I work at the just different things, whatever pays the money. I actually survived the gaming industry by picking up things no one wants to do. That's
Mm.
how I ended up doing art outsourcing, because 20 years ago, during one of the economy meltdown, as you can see in history,
Mhm.
usually people want to find a scapegoat, and one of the scapegoat are outsourcers. Outsourcers are seen as traitors because we gave our jobs away to people overseas, and we are also seen as we got this outsourcing manager job because we couldn't find a real art job.
Ooh.
So it was not seen as a glamorous
Mhm.
job title, but I was desperate. I was like, I had my first child. I couldn't pay for her. I was fired when I was pregnant, and I was fired when she was 5 months.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I was looking for a job, like and yeah, my life was depending on it. And anything that anyone said uh, they need, I would just show up. I remember going to a company in the San Francisco,
Mhm.
and I was 7.5 months pregnant, but I have to wheel in my Dell laptop. Back then, it was like over
Yeah, it's much
25.
bigger.
If you wanted to run Maya and not crash, it has to be that one. And it might be pouring rain and stuff, but I was dragging it. I dragged it upstairs, and then one of the job that I was doing was a lot of weapons for Hell's Gate London,
Mhm.
and I did so many weapons. But initially, they wanted me to see how long it takes for me to make a weapon,
Mm.
and it took me about a few days to figure out the proprietary software.
Yes.
But so I told them about, I think I told them about 500 or 1,000 a piece. I can't remember,
Yeah.
but it was a big number for me back then.
Mhm.
And it's like, sure.
Deal. Okay, let's do this.
So I got so good at it, I was pumping out a weapon a day.
Wow.
So, because I didn't have a job at the time, and health insurance was costing me almost $2,000 a month. And I was
And you're
just
7 months
generating.
pregnant in the midst of this. So you're like, let's get going. You have a small arsenal that you have built out with a weapon a day. But I
I
can
just
totally see
generated.
like under those crunch, you're like, yes, this is a contract that's gonna give me money. It's gonna be consistent and you can do it and you can do it quickly. How can you
Yep.
say no to something like that?
And the sad part is, I went when I couldn't walk anymore. They said, "Can you work from home?" So I said, "Yes." I tried my best to VPN it in and work from home. And I worked until I couldn't sit anymore because the weight of the baby is so. I actually cried my way through the last weapon.
What was the weapon that was so like as you're struggling to get through? Do you like remember like I will never like this weapon again?
I actually love all the work I did, but it's one of the weapons for Hellsgate London, and
Mhm.
I couldn't. When I sent in my last one, I told them I couldn't do it anymore. And then 6 weeks later, after my child was born, they said, "When are you coming back to work? We're going to give you a full time job." So I went back in 6 weeks. And if you ever had a baby before, especially your first one, it felt like you got run over by a car.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit run over by the car inside and outside, right? Like you kind of put your body
And
through the
mentally,
ringer.
but I showed up because I didn't want it to go away. I don't want them to give it to someone else.
Hmm.
But because of that, my body didn't recover properly. And I have 4 breast infection in 3 months. And during that time, diversity and inclusion and women in game doesn't exist. So
Yeah.
it's I was embarrassed to tell my employer what was wrong with me because, they are all men.
Yeah, they don't understand. They've never given birth. They have no concerns with yeah.
And then, but my immediate manager was really nice. I remember I almost fainted at the office. He grabbed me. I remember he has this racing car. I think it was Porsche or something. He just took me straight to ER. But he
You
was
get like a top
gentleman.
tier 5-star
Yeah,
drive to the hospital.
instead of a ambulance that was
Yeah.
in the Porsche. But it was he was gentleman enough not to ask what was wrong with me, and I
Mhm.
really appreciate that. And even if he asked, I don't know if I would say because it's very embarrassing for me at the time.
Mhm.
But a few months later, this company didn't do quite well as they planned, so I got laid off again, and I have to actually this time find a job while I was breastfeeding. And one of the job, when I showed up, I told my mom, who was helping me out at the moment,
Mhm.
uh, just take care of Sabrina, my daughter. The interview will just be in the city. I'll go by BART, the subway here.
Mhm.
I'll come back in 3 hours. So I pumped and I left. And then during the interview, the owner goes, "Can you start right now?" And I went, "Okay." I didn't bring my pump or anything.
It feels so unheard of in today's practice. Unless you're going to like a fast food restaurant, they're like, yeah, let's hop you behind the counter at this point. Like, no other place is like, yeah, come on, let's fire up your laptop and get you going right now. That seems unnerving. And the amount of orchestration you had to do, like talking with your mom, timing your breastfeeding, right? That way you could be home back in time for things again, right? That's a lot of unspoken effort.
Yeah, and women at the time don't talk about it
Hmm.
because they just don't. Even talking about raising a child, people just look at you because all you have was at the time, 20 years ago,
Hmm.
bachelor and bachelorettes in the gaming industry. That's
Yeah.
all they are.
Yeah.
That's not a lot of older married people. There
Yeah.
are, but not in the startups.
Mhm. Not
And
to like what the degree we see nowadays. It's very
yes,
different. Before you
and
continue in your story, I want to pause something
yes,
because I think it would be really interesting to hear because you had mentioned, and this still seems like still where you are in your story, how much you had to harden your skin of like going through and kind of taking any job, being open to all of that. What is that like, especially even from the beginning, starting off with like freelancing and contracting in that end? You're really trying to find any opportunity on that end. That's a very vulnerable position. How do you brace yourself to continue to push yourself out there? Because we still hear the challenges even today of, job searching fatigue, of having to
yes.
keep applying and keep putting yourself out, writing another cover letter, you know?
It was tiring back then. You have to imagine 20 years ago, there was no LinkedIn, there was no social media,
Yeah.
there was no smartphones. Everything is a physical card or name card. I was trying to find my name card right here.
Yeah.
So I have different name card where I have different art behind my card.
Oh, I love that.
This is the front, but here it says I met Shiew Yeu at. So back then, if you go to a lot of conferences, you meet 1,000 people. At least you can write down where you met me. And also back then, you have to think outside the box.
Hmm.
There were so many competitions. So I remember when I was graduating in 2004, uh, we don't have an art station, and I didn't have money to buy a website to put up my work. And I actually created this video cassette tape, our with a booklet of, so you don't have to pop the video cassette
Yes.
in
There's a
before.
quick preview into it,
Yeah,
essentially.
and I
Brilliant.
purposely make my 8 letter size resume stick out. So if you imagine you are a recruiter 20 years ago in a room full of thousands of video cassette tape all piled up behind you, how do yours stick out?
Hmm.
So I even make my resume so you can fill out. And I make this whole thing by hand.
That is amazing. I
I
love
made a
that.
lot of it. And eventually, video cassette went away and we have DVD players.
This feels like an evolution of technology. You have your own small museum at this
And
point.
then I have a booklet right here with my business card and everything in here. So,
Wow. I mean, it's brilliant. But also, then I also wonder because you're trying to find a job and at the same time of like supporting yourself and being around and trying to stay in the city where you want to be and where the work is, that you also then have to put money into buying right these video
yeah,
cassettes and money into, at least you are the designer, you can create them, but you have to produce them, you have to
yeah,
work with a merchandiser essentially to create all of these materials and hope there's no misprints and that it came out
yeah,
exactly as planned and that they're going to look at it at the end of the day.
correct.
What
So,
an investment.
luckily, I work as a printer.
Hmm.
So I understand all the technical that needs to go in order for something to print.
Yeah.
So on top of it, I actually at the time I went to Art Institute of San Francisco.
Hmm.
Um, there is a lot of controversial around the school, but when the school came about, the PR person was asking for demo reels from the students. No one would give him anything. So I gave him everything that I have. Next thing I know, on San Francisco Market Street on the banner,
Hmm.
it was all my work. It was actually this girl right here, and it was printed on the mouse pad. It was showcased on, this is a magazine back then.
Wow.
You can see Half Life 2. There was ages ago, but my work was in here. So all these were free advertisement for me.
Yeah.
So I just freely put myself out there.
Hmm.
And back then during GDC, they actually let students go in for free. They don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But there is a section at the back that says career section. It's thousands of students trying to line up or at, I don't know, ILM or, all the electronic art trying to show off their stuff. I did that, but I didn't get anything because there was so many of us.
Mm.
But this is what I did. Back then we have to have a physical portfolio,
Yes.
and mine looked like this.
I love
So
that you always go for faces that draw us in. Like, look at that expression there.
so when I walk around like this carrying this guy, people will, it's kind of like a walking billboard.
Yes.
So
Yes.
after I went to the career fair, I didn't feel like it was working.
Hmm.
So I went around a section where there's a lot of booth by businesses, and I just walk around with this big thing.
Just hold
And
it.
one of them is a smaller company that was a competitor of NVIDIA. It's called S3 Graphics. The guy saw it and he said, "What's that?" And I show him more of my portfolio. And he said, "We are looking for someone to create our mascot that we can use and print on our conferences."
Hmm.
Uh, at the time, I was a graphic designer and my salary was $35 an hour 20 years ago. But I was desperately in need of money.
Yeah.
So he said, "So what is your cost? How much do you are you?" So I can propose it to my manager.
Hmm.
And I thought for a long time, and I go $50 an hour, and I had the poker face.
Yes. Sell it.
And then as soon as I said it, I regret it immensely. I'm like, what the heck was I thinking? That is so expensive. And then he thought for like the longest 30 second of my life.
Hmm.
And he goes, "Okay, this is my business card."
It paid off. It paid off. But what a freezing moment that is, because you never know. And you're like, have I just shot myself in the foot? Because I would have done what I needed to take this job.
Right. And actually, I ran back to my university and told my director,
Yeah, of
and she was,
course. It's a victory. You need to have someone to celebrate with you.
that was the semester I was graduating. I needed a lot of money to graduate. Producing all those artwork needs money, the
Yes.
materials and stuff. So while I was graduating, I was working for them. And I was living in a place where there are other students. They were so happy that I was the first one in the house to graduate.
Hmm.
Back then, we have this thing called render farm.
Okay.
Render farm is if you have a certain animation, you need to get the computer to render, 1 to 1,000, 1,000. So they loan me their computer to render everything. So I
How
can
long did that take?
a long time. You start it when you go to sleep and you wake up a few hours later and then you check.
Hoping that it didn't crash in the middle of the
So
night. Yes, yes.
you check every. It was crazy. And then I did that for my graduation as well as my job. And the week before I graduate,
Mhm.
my job as street graphics, they have some problem. They had to do something that they didn't expect, but they have to present to like their VP
Oh,
something.
okay.
So they asked on Monday if I could do it, and they did it by Wednesday. And Friday is my graduation.
This is fine. I love cutting it close. This is perfect. Let's just
I
hope
didn't sleep,
everything works out.
and he even gave me his personal cell phone. He
Hmm.
said, "If it's 2 o'clock in the morning, call me. I will pick up."
Gosh. But
So
it
I
works
call
because
him.
people wanted to do that for you. Like they saw your goal, your vision, what you were working for, and they're like, let me help in any way I can to help get you across that finish line.
But I think at the time they don't have any other option
Yeah.
because
Oh.
the timeline was really close
Hmm.
and outsourcing was not an option back then. It was not very well heard of, or not a lot of people know how to do it.
Right.
They just usually just contract the work.
Hmm.
So I did it, and I remember calling him at 6 o'clock in the morning, like, "It's all done. It's in your hard drive."
I hope you're awake. You are now. And that's probably what is this around where we're having cell phones at this point? Or are we all still mainly landlines?
We have cell phones.
Okay. I didn't know if like we're not near the VHS. We're in the DVD phase.
Yeah, I remember the flip phones.
Yes. The cool razor
BlackBerry
ones
was a
everyone had.
big thing back then. BlackBerry and Nokia. Nokia was a big thing.
Yes. The brick where you could play Snake on it. Yes. Yes. Okay. This is good.
So
These are our tech
yeah,
markers. Okay.
correct. But I also established a lot of good relationship with my teachers. They work from in the industry, and I would go in their workspace, and they trust me enough to bring me to work and look at how the industry works.
Hmm.
And one of the really well known, I think the most memorable person, his name is Grant Imahara.
Hmm.
Um, he passed away a few years ago. But he's a guy who did the robotics for R2D2, the second generation. The first one has a dwarf in it, and it was in robotic. But at the time, I was really depressed, and I didn't know if what I did was going well. I was going to school for the second time. And it was also the time where Lucas, they call it modeling team, but
Hmm.
it's not 3D model, it's a hands model. All of them were out of job because of the CG. That was during the time.
Hmm.
And I was in the a studio of M5 Industry. It's the studio who did Mythbuster.
Wow.
And it was also the studio that did all the Gremlin, Back to the Future props, and
Hmm.
a lot of stop motion like James and the Giant Peach.
Such
My teacher
favorite
took us,
films.
yeah, my teacher took us there because our classroom was bare minimum and he couldn't get us to do anything. So he got us to the studio so we can use the tools. So I was talking to Grant Imahara, and he was in between jobs, but he was actually out of job. But he said in between job, he has such positive uh, charisma to him. And then he said, "Do you want to go see R2D2 and what it looks like?" I was like, sure.
Yeah.
So he drove me to Lucas.
Who says no in that situation, right? You're like, nah, I think I'm good. No, no, thank you.
So he drove me there, and when he we walked in, I remember seeing his coworker. At the time, Perfect Storm just finished.
Yeah.
So when you finish a film, you get this trophy that is all hand painted and handmade. They were making the Perfect Storms trophy for each and every one of the people who worked on it. And then he took me to see R2D2, and then he's like, "You want to see inside?" He opened it. There's nothing. Just
Just
wires.
like those. Yeah, that's what should have been in there. I don't know what we were expecting when we opened this, but here
I
we
wish
are.
that is a smartphone. I didn't take any, but he makes me feel really hopeful in a
Yes.
time that is really hard.
Yeah.
And even he was going through a hard time. I feel like he was giving hope to people around him.
Mm.
And I never seen him really depressed.
Yeah.
And at the time, the owner of M5 Industry, Jamie, was also going through a hard time because movies wasn't doing well because they wanted to use CG,
Hmm.
and they were making good money with one of the NBA players. However, he got injured, so the contract stopped. So they were filming the first episode of Mythbuster,
Right in there, and you're like, okay, here we go.
but they didn't know whether it was going to work. And I remember him telling me the rent for this place is 10,000 a month. To ten
Like, I
thousand.
really hope this works.
And I remember I would use his computer because I didn't have money to buy a computer. I wanted to do my homework, and he would turn off all the lights down there. He will come up because I'm next to his office.
Hmm.
I think he's walking really slowly, so I can finish.
Just to
It's
give
like,
you a few
well,
extra minutes towards it,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. He's like, I'm closing. I'm like, I'm done. I'm done. Safe, safe, safe.
This is fine. Yes, perfect timing. Thank you. Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, it took me a while. I think I took a year before I bought my own computer, and I was just using the computer at school and I'm fine.
But I mean, look, the computers are still, they still are today expensive, but even more so then, and especially one that is able to run the programs that you need,
Yeah.
right? That's a hefty price tag.
So I after a while, people telling me, "Hey, Jamie's really famous now. He has fans
Yeah.
coming up to him." I'm like, really?
What are you talking about? That old warehouse building, that venue? What are you talking? What? But it makes me think how important it was to have have somebody like a mentor essentially that opened doors for you, whether it was like the emotional support or the tech access, right? Or just even the excitement, right? Of showing like, look at these cool things and how re-energizing that
Yeah.
can be.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even though things were hard for them,
Yeah.
I feel like they always try to, even though they are helping themselves,
Mm-hmm.
they want to bring the community up with them.
Mm-hmm.
When they find opportunity, they will tell their friends first. And I learned that about Bay Area. That's how the artists work. There was an unspoken rule that you help each other,
Mm-hmm.
even though the other person didn't directly tell you to help them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a beautiful community, but it's also kind of funny those that act in kindness and lift others up tend to also get lifted up in those spaces, right? Like it's
I think that's how I eventually learned to survive the hardest time.
mm-hmm.
You are not really meant to help yourself all the time. During some of my lowest point in my life, I could actually, I think I lacked the opportunity to connect with nature,
Mm.
with animals. I remember getting my dog and learning to, you know how PetSmart have the dog training. I think
Yes.
it's more for me than for her.
Yeah. Well, they say, yeah, for the trainings, it's to teach you how to work with your dog. It's not to train
How
your
they
dog.
communicate with you.
Yes. Yes.
After I learned that, I was able to read other dogs and cats and other animals.
Mm.
And during COVID, I remember going to the same hiking trail.
Yeah.
And for that whole year, I could see the flora and fauna bloom, wither, and come back again the next year. I could read
Mm.
the land really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
And I really miss those times. I also find opportunity to connect with myself.
Mm-hmm.
I started gardening like everyone else, home improvement.
Right.
My the
Either you
first
gardened or
100.
you made bread, right? Like those were the two options.
So my home was actually really in a bad state because I was trying to, keep my children alive. I'm a single mom,
Mm-hmm.
and my roof was dripping. So during storms, I had buckets all over the place. I feel like I'm back in Malaysia.
Catching the rainwater from inside your house. Or yeah, just
So
put a
I
plant under there and it looks purposeful.
yes. So after I left electronic arts, I sold all my stock, and it was a good price during that year,
Mm-hmm.
2020.
Mm-hmm.
And I used all the money to fix up my house,
Yeah.
and that was so much water damage. And they told me if you haven't fixed it, it will collapse.
Oh god. You're like you didn't know you were like months
I was
away from
so
like nothing there.
like either my children were kept alive or the house collapsed.
But I think this is so important because sometimes when we think of like, oh, if I work at a AAA studio, like one of the big names, I'm gonna be rolling in money. Like I'm not gonna have to worry about covering household expenses, and but it's the payment can be different levels still at so many different
Yeah.
times, right? And still, right, we see with different artists or different industries, right, that negotiation of pay and how do we make sure that it's equitable, especially for very high cost of living areas.
Yes. The reason I stay in the city of Daly City
Mm-hmm.
is because the cost around here is much lower.
Mm.
So you have San Francisco. The first physical city is called Daly City.
Mm-hmm.
We call it the Philippines of America. It's the most highest concentration of Filipino in America.
Okay.
Even Joe Coy, the Filipino uh, uh, comedian,
Yeah.
he made a movie Easter Sunday based in Daly City.
Feels like home. Here we go.
But after Daly City, there's a few more cities, and then you came to the Silicon Valley, and then the cost of living come up again. And just to have a better picture of what it's like, let's say you have a child that is going to preschool,
Mm-hmm.
or a child that need to go to summer camp in the summer. In San Francisco, preschool is 1,000 to 15,000 a month,
Oh.
and then but the affordable one, before you even get pregnant, you have to put the down payment.
Hopefully this all works out. It just because yeah, some of them have what, like 10, 12 month waiting lines, and like, well, it
Correct.
only takes 9 months to make a baby.
And starting to where electronic arts is
Uh-huh.
around San Mateo, Silicon Valley area, it is the same thing. However, even with 1,500 a month, you probably could do Monday, Wednesday, Friday,
Hmm.
and then you had to pick up at 3:30, or else they charge by the minute. It's not even by the and you have to pay extended care. So I couldn't afford any of that.
Oh.
So I stayed in Daly City. And when the costs went up, I noticed a lot of San Francisco and Silicon Valley parent came to Daly City for like summer camp
Mm.
because back then they have started a lot of camps that to make sure the kids don't get involved in gangsters or prostitution. Back then, it was really, really bad.
Hmm.
So the program's still running, and it was made affordable to the first generation immigrants. So that's why I stayed. Like one of my son's basketball camp is about, I think, a few $100s for the whole summer,
Hmm.
whereas in San Francisco, it's a few $100s a week.
Yeah, this is, yep, notable differences. But this is such an important approach, because sometimes when we think about, I want to be in the gaming industry, it's looking at all the resources you have in your entire community, not just ones that like the one company you're working for can provide, but it's also like, if I work for this company and I live in this town, what does this town provide me, right? What can they
Correct.
offer me? And that's why a lot of companies now are looking at like, how do we have satellite offices, or how do we let
Correct.
people work from home, or remote opportunities to try to include more individuals on different levels and accommodate so many different lifestyle needs.
One thing that came out from COVID that was great was people became more empathetic.
Hmm.
People don't have to put out the front. Everything is, we are like all an open book. Also, as a outsourcing artist and manager, I work with artists from around the world.
Hmm.
I work with mothers around the world, and in a lot of big companies will put their office in metropolitan cities where the cost of living is high.
Right.
And let's say in Shanghai, somebody say, "Oh, Shiew Yeu bought the house." For a Chinese person, it's a good thing,
Yeah.
but I know their commute will go up to 3 hours a day
Whoa.
because most people cannot afford anything near the office.
Mm,
It's too
yes,
expensive.
that makes sense. And yeah, that, and then you're talking about not only your typical hour week, but then you're adding every day those 3 hours for five
Correct.
days that you are unable to do anything else. You're just driving, you're commuting, right? That takes away
Correct.
from your family, it takes away from your free time, it takes away from your rest at that moment. Whew.
And in a lot of metropolitan city, people there's an unspoken rule. Like in America,
Hmm.
when game industry started, there was a lot of crunch time,
Hmm.
and that is the unspoken rule. You don't go home until your manager goes home, or you have to work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day.
Hmm.
But then our in America, our founders grew older, and people went through season of life.
Hmm.
But in other countries, they are still young and they are going through things that Americans are going through 10, 20 years ago.
Hmm.
And for example, a lot of the mothers in Asia, they would tell me they don't see their toddlers until the weekend because they have to work 12 hours a day. There's no way they can take care of a toddler or a baby. So they leave it in the village with their parents.
Wow. That paints such a different picture of motherhood. I want to talk about two topics. So, first, I want us to address, right, being a mother in the game industry, that cycle of it. And of course, not only your own experience, but how you see other mothers within the game industry having to cycle through this balance of work, career progression, and motherhood. And then later, I also want to talk about, right, how cultural differences come into play in working in international teams and the expectations of it. So let's dive into being a mother in the game space. So obviously, like as you were going through, a lot of what you went through in your motherhood felt like it was a secret, right? Like no one needs
Yeah.
to know what's going on here. Like, am I pregnant? No worries. 6 weeks, here we are coming back. It's fine, right? Like breastfeeding, that's not a thing for me. Don't worry. Like, but you played a very high level of incognito with mother mode.
Because I didn't have an option to fail, so I just have to move forward,
Hmm. Yes.
no matter what it takes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, for you now, with your children, how has this evolved? How has this kind of changed for you in your own position of who you are as a mom and who you are also in your career, right? I'm
I,
balancing those two.
I think a lot of people, especially people who have a very blessed life,
Hmm.
when a lot of things have been provided for them,
Right.
they are really shocked how difficult parenthood is and how much commitment and how much unforeseen things that can happen not just every day but every hour and every minute.
Yes.
So
Surprise.
it it makes you into a very empathetic but very wise leader. It
Hmm.
builds character and resilience. You have to do the same thing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then start again Monday, Tuesday,
Yes.
for many, many, many years. But one thing that helps is to have a community,
Mm.
and on top of that, have a community that will provide that support system for you. One thing I do advocate to employer is parents and mothers are not the weakling
Hmm.
at this time. Their transitional time is actually what is making them stronger.
Mm. Okay,
If
talk me
you
through that.
if you provide them enough support system while they are transitioning,
Hmm.
by the time at the end of the transition, they could multitask really well.
Hmm.
They have a different and wiser, and they went through so many hardship. Whatever you ask of them, they could think of things that you don't really think about, because in their personal life they have to think about things from every single perspective.
Because children will make their problem solving skills tested every day. Got it. Yes. Talk about transferable life skills, right?
And not when you take care of a children, you don't just deal with your children, you're dealing with your spouse, your relative,
Yes.
the school, and all the activities that are
Hmm.
involved. So my kids, they're all in competitive sports. My daughter was a competitive dancer,
Hmm.
and my son was a competitive basketball player. Now, this is his first year as a volleyball player.
Hmm.
Yesterday, I was at his tournament for more than 12 hours.
Okay, first of all, I'm sure it was a very exciting tournament, but I do know bleacher seats are not that comfortable. So 12 hours in a gymnasium is not a great option.
And I was also a team mom for all his basketball teams
Yeah.
for AAU. My daughter, from her when she was younger, I was a class mom. They call it a class mom.
Hmm.
She started with musical theater, and then she ventured into ballet, nutcracker, hip hop, jazz, contemporary. So the first half of the school year, so from August to December, is nutcracker,
Hmm.
and then January through May into summer is competition, and summer is national competition. So is basketball.
Let's do everything right now. Really test your limits.
So I have to go to different states for all of them. By the end of the summer, I need a vacation.
Yeah,
Just
no joke. And now you're going to just slip away and do Hawaii for a weekend and then we'll be fine. Yes. Just breathe. Just breathe.
my daughter is first year in college now,
Mhm.
and my son is 16. So I got 3 more years.
That's amazing. But part of it is one that you have the energy, but also the time and the means to be able to go support your kids in that. Because I mean, even earlier on, hearing like you're taking any job, you're working hours, you can't go home until your manager goes home, right? That can be very demanding. for people who want to be there for their children in that same
It
light.
is earlier in I did talk to the Sims VP, and at the time she was a mother, but
Mm-hmm.
when I started, she wasn't a mother.
Mm-hmm.
Coming in certain weekend was mandatory during certain part of the
Season.
work, work workflow.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember even working really hard Monday to Friday, and then Saturday I have to drop them off at grandma. I would cry all the way to
Oh,
work.
oh, because it's not what you wanted to do, right? Like, yes, I get that. I get that.
But later on, it got better. They got more lenient. My kids was older, and I could bring them to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, EA have given them all the things EA could have given child's employee of a child. They grew up at
Yeah.
EA. They want to like bring your kids to work day, the holiday event where you have two-story high Elsa's castle or
Oh,
the summer carnival where everything is free. You have inflatables, you have zip line, you have ice cream on every corner.
they really like, we're gonna sell it, right? We know we take your parents for our long, stressful work hours. Here's a big celebration for everyone. But right, like that's that payoff, like knowing that you have to be here. How do we make these spaces safe and welcoming for families? Mm,
I remember later years in EA, my sitting area is very close to a room where all the VP is.
yeah.
There is a setup where you can play Nintendo or PlayStation. So my son will always park himself there.
Yes. That's my office, right? Like we get his own little name tag on the outside of the room or something.
I remember I was so embarrassed because he was so loud with his friends. One of the VP came over and I was like, okay, I was going to run over and say, don't get so loud. And she goes, hey, can my son play with you?
Like, that sounds like fun. Yeah, keep going, kid.
I was like,
Network.
oh.
Network.
And then she parked both her kids there and she went to work.
Good, they'll entertain themselves. That's even
Yeah.
better. But it makes more sense because I mean, you're all working at a gaming company. You're like, oh, good, they're having fun. Yes, go join, go.
And I remember when Sabrina was younger, my son, the preschool will be open
Hmm.
a lot more days than the public school. Public school have, spring break and so on. I would bring her to work, and the office manager has a teenager who is a girl,
Hmm.
and I would saw her, and Sabrina saw her, and she goes, "Hi, can I play with her?" So I'm like, in my brain's like, "Oh, babysitter."
She was like, check, got it. Gonna get, yeah.
So every time Sabrina would go to my office, she would look, "Well, where's my friend?"
Yes, yes. But it makes me think of how much of a community game companies are. Like you're not just choosing like this is a place where I'm going to work because yeah, to some degree you are. But also when you want to stay there, it's because I this works for me. I can bring my kids. My kids enjoy it. Like this is functional for my whole
Correct.
life.
I think one of the best external partner that I was working with for Sims,
Mhm.
I noticed how everybody else are struggling, but this company was doing quite well at the time.
Mhm.
They had at the time, you have to imagine 20 years ago, benefit was not readily available in Asian companies.
Right.
But yeah, owner says if you just had a baby and you come back to work, you can come in an hour late and go home an hour early. So you actually have to only work 6 hours a day. And
Mhm.
that was never heard of.
Yeah.
And instead of 2.5 months, you can take 4 months off for your maternity leave.
You're here.
Yeah. And I remember when I started working with them,
Mhm.
none of them have children, my team actually.
Yeah.
And throughout the year, they are still working with EA even I left.
Mhm.
They when they started to have kids, I noticed they commute together to work, and in the weekend they have play dates with each other's kids. So they form a community
Yeah.
of their own, and a lot of it's the lowest turnover that I've seen at external companies at the time
Mm. Mm.
because
That's
of the community
well
and the
that's
support system.
so important, right? Like, because I want to. I'm trying to decide, do I hold out on this story? Because I want us to start then leading that into the topic of how do we build healthy workplaces, talking about diversity, talking about inclusion, talking about accessibility, right, within these spaces. But I also want to prep us for a little bit of a break. So I'm thinking on this end, when you're talking about uh, you're working here in these spaces, because I think this will be a little shorter. Talk about, when we're working with limited resources, right? We only have so much time or we only have so much budget. How do we balance these? And then we'll take a small break after that and we'll come back and talk about creating inclusive and diverse spaces. So,
Right. So, what is the question for right now before the
yeah.
break? I'm so sorry.
So yeah, no. So on that end, when we're talking about like these teams, right? We've got to be on here for all these hours, but that comes in from a budget, right? So when you have all these teams and you're wanting to accomplish those goals, how do you work with limited resources, limited budgets, right? And I know, of course, you've had extensive experience with this, like even on your own personally when you first started out working on your own budget and making it work, and then even or later on when you're starting to manage budgets, when you're managing teams and times, how do you work with individuals to say, hey, you should not be working the weekend right now. We don't have the hours to pay you for that. Like
Yeah.
this needs to, or we need to speed this process along. Right? You mentioned crunch time
Yeah.
on that end. How do we manage that kind of flow of resources, flow of time?
So for a new project,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the the motto that you should adhere to is make sure the gameplay and the design is there. The art can be ugly. Make sure the design is fun
Mm-hmm.
and it makes sense and there's a longer retention. For mobile game, retention is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you buy a $60 AAA game, you don't want to finish playing it in 2 days,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And but you don't want it to be too difficult that people give up.
Mm-hmm.
So what is because then it's not fun.
Yeah. I don't feel like a victor at the end of this. This makes me feel stupid, right? Like people aren't playing those games.
Also, you need to have a revenue strategy that works for your game.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get people to start paying? And then what kind of audience you have? You do always have the high paying. You have the people who do play,
Mm-hmm.
but they only spend a little bit of money. But you have different. That's usually three categories,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have the middle one. So what kind of games do you want to play? What is your target audience? Is it open to all, like more broader audience, or is it like the hardcore fighting game, or is it like a triple A single player?
Mm-hmm.
So what are the markets now? What works?
Mm-hmm.
So that those are the questions you are doing when you have a smaller team and a smaller budget,
Mm-hmm.
and give yourself sufficient timeline, because for one, you want to have enough time to build a solid strategy, but most artists and most perfectionists don't know when to stop.
What? I have no idea what you're talking about.
And then commitment is very hard for them,
Yes.
but you have to build out a roadmap where it is visually makes sense to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
When I say makes sense to everyone, I'm talking about alignment. Alignment means alignment between leadership and the dev teams,
Mm.
and then that is up to down a very what do you call vertical,
Yes.
and then alignment between all the discipline and all your peers. So that's very horizontal.
Mm-hmm.
But usually, what I see is they align in the beginning of the project, and then because they're all perfectionists and they're all talented, they run 1,000 miles an hour straight forward in different direction. And by the time I come in, I'm like, why is nothing makes sense?
Everyone's done different ideas of what they think is right, and it's
When
great, but it's not together.
is not together, they're running solo. There's
Mm-hmm.
no documentation, or the documentation doesn't make sense. It was done ages ago, or there's duplicates of the same thing
Mm-hmm.
in different tools. There is no tracking, or if there's tracking, there's like 5 tracking softwares that they do, and no one wants to give in. And now you have all these problems that is problem on top of problem, and you have to peel up all this layers before you can get to the root.
That sounds really painful to be like, okay, hold on. We've got to reverse time here in this moment when we it's probably when you're at that moment when we're like, we need to reverse time. It's because we're out of time and we've done this poorly, you know?
Correct. So alignment, best practices,
Mm.
and roadmaps.
Mm-hmm.
So, you are a 10-person team or 20-person team. What can you do within that time?
Mm-hmm.
And how long do you need? And then is the gameplay fun? And does it make sense? Does it generate revenue? It could be fun, but no one wants to pay anything. And it still doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have a lot of more problems on end,
Yes.
right?
And then when you figure that out, then the art can come in.
Mm-hmm. But I think this is really an interesting skill set because obviously you came in as a designer, you have an art mindset, you know what looks good. But here, everything you're talking about is very much so from that management side. And I think that's where that biggest gap is because
Yeah,
oftentimes in a lot of workplaces, it's like, yes, you did your job really well. Therefore, it also must mean that you can manage other people doing that job really well. And that's a whole new level, right? That's a whole new thing of
it,
being able to
it
talk to
is.
people about processes or making sure we're all on the same page. How do I communicate and negotiate the conflicts of these teams? How do I help guide them? That's something
Right.
very different from I did this job well.
And after 20 years, you see the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And you also have wisdom where people don't have to explain a lot for you to understand what's going on, what are the undercurrent, how to read in between all their words that they're trying to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Or it also takes a lot of soft skill. A lot of times people have selective hearing.
Mm-hmm.
They only hear what they wanted to hear, and they have one very selfish goal. So a lot of times they don't hear everything else. You have to make sure that the attention is not on you. It's all about the game.
Yeah.
You don't matter. You're just a small part of the bigger picture. That's how I see myself coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And I listen a lot. I think a lot of the times the first 2 months is just listening and observing. And then first I would see who is the stakeholders
Right.
and who do too much, not producing enough result.
Yes, yes. You look at it, you're like, that's a lot of hours, but not a lot of output here. Or
You're
not the
running
right
in the
output,
same
maybe.
circle. Or if there is conflict, why and what? And is it cultural? And there is a lot of culture, even within America. I tell the rest of the world and the rest of America, Californians are very, very, very sensitive.
Mhm.
You cannot come to a Californian and tell them that, what the heck are you doing? You're doing everything wrong.
You can do that in New York, though. I can
You
say that.
could, you
Yeah.
could. They told me you could.
Yeah. They're good. They appreciate that actually. They prefer
Yes,
the
yes,
directness. Well, let's say New York
yes.
Cityans. All right.
And also Eastern European and South American, they prefer direct
Mm-hmm.
communication.
Mm-hmm.
However, for Californians, you have to honeycomb a lot of things, and you have to tell people to do their job in a question like, "Hey, Jack, would you like to do this? Have you thought about this?" Instead of Jack, do this.
Yeah. Yeah. What an interesting framing, right? But it recognizes perhaps the preferences people have and it creates a little bit of a face saving technique, right?
It is
And not making a power play, but more of a conversation approach.
because with Silicon Valley,
Mm,
a lot of the hierarchical structure that was established in the 50s have been torn down.
mm-hmm,
For example, one of the founders of Pixar, he wrote a book, and I actually saw him at one of the fireside chat. He said something like, "In my meetings, I always ask people with the least power to speak up first,
mm,
and then people with the most power will say something at the end."
mm-hmm, mm,
And I really appreciate that because most people only care about what they wanted to say, but they didn't hear about other people. And I learned a lot from the younger generations
mm-hmm,
because they are going through things I don't have to deal with when I was growing up.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's funny, like how quickly all this evolves. Like even if we were to talk like 2 years ago, the gaming industry was still very different. It's so
Yes.
quickly changing that
It is.
continually bringing in those voices matter. But it also should remind people, like, when they are invited to speak, like, there's also thinking about, like, you need to have your thoughts in order. What are you going to say, right? Just because you have the stage doesn't mean you should take it forever.
And then let me paint you a picture in a very hierarchical structure,
Mm,
which I also went through in America.
mm,
In a meeting, and before you come to a meeting, if you have a message, you have to talk to all the stakeholders and get them to agree to your message
mhm,
and then plan the whole thing out. And then during the meeting, you will say your message, and then all the stakeholders like, yes, I agree with her
mhm.
100%. So you have to do all this back. It's called politics, by the
Yes.
way. You
Yes. Oh,
haven't
yeah.
know.
And people think like that's, yeah, that's not just in politics, but it is like even when you're doing pitches, you're like you're technically pitching individually first when you can, and
Yes,
then you do the pitch. Like by the time you're actually doing the presentation, you should have an idea of already where everybody stands.
correct. And a lot of times I'll come into a space and see who are the person who actually is driving the
Mm,
game and driving the direction.
mhm,
Usually, it might not be the person with the highest job title.
mhm,
If the person with the highest job title is a people pleaser,
mhm,
I notice there are other people who step in to cover up that space because somebody has to. It might work and sometimes it might not,
mhm.
but that create a problem. And there was also some conflict because people expect the person with the higher job title
Yeah.
to be the one speaking and owning the space during the meeting. But when he or she or they are silent, it creates a problem. If people speak up, that means they might step over somebody's toe. Or most creative are introvert.
Mhm.
They don't like drama and they don't like to talk.
Just let me do my work and I'll be good.
Yes,
Yeah.
leave me alone. I'm right behind
Yeah.
my Cintiq.
Yeah.
Bye bye. So
Oh.
I also work, since I work with a lot of introvert, I actually have to go do one-on-one with each of them and figure
Mm,
each of them out and whether their needs are being met so that they can be effective.
mhm,
So that's part of my job. So before COVID, when I was working at EA, I will actually go to every single concept artist cubicle and say good morning. I won't leave until they look up and say good
Just remember, I'm here. Hello.
morning.
This
Good
is
morning.
this is my face, so that way you don't forget me, and you are welcome to say hi to me back. Yeah.
One of them is a Korean, really like soft-spoken
Mhm,
artist.
mhm.
She found this really exceptionally narrow cubicle in front of this structural pillar,
Yes. To hide
and she
more
hid
behind.
behind the pillar. But every morning, I would say good morning to her first.
Yes. Yeah. You're like, okay, you've put yourself there, but I see you, and now you're specifically identified. But
And
that's
then
such
later
a big
on,
moment. Like you
yes,
see her, and you don't want her to
yes.
think like she's forgotten.
And then later on, when I talked to her afterwards, a few years later after I left
Mhm.
EA, she said that was the highlight of my day.
Oh.
And then sometimes when I go on vacation, I
Yeah.
didn't come back. It's like something is missing.
I've been sitting here. Did time not pass the same way I thought it was? Yeah, you kind of get lost in those because it's something you become dependent on. And I think that's so important in recognizing how influential in small behaviors we can be towards others. And the
Sometimes,
smallest thing. Yeah.
yeah, sometimes it takes baby step to connect,
Yeah. Yeah.
and different people are different. But if you make that effort,
Hmm.
you don't have to say anything. People feel it. Sometimes I tell people they might not remember what you did to them, but they remember how it felt,
Hmm.
and
Yes.
that lasts a lifetime.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes. And honestly, that's such a small little simple step. Like you came by each day, said hello, made eye contact, but that's still not pushing it too far, right? It was
Yeah,
still within it's her space where she's comfortable. She looks up when she's ready on that.
and then when you say hi, I can
Yeah,
leave.
yeah. Hi, and then we're good. Then we move on, right? Like it's small moments of pushing and challenging, but also recognizing that it's going to be paced because so many people in this like and it doesn't matter. It's not just the gaming industry, right? Like some people are really great at building relationships right away, and they're dynamic and they're extroverted and they're ready to dive right into it and feel connected. And then for others, right? Like on that introverted side, it can be exhausting.
It is very exhausting. So I have different tips for introvert leaders
Mm-hmm.
for different things like conferences.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure your room is the same hotel as the conference.
Mm.
So you can eat lunch by yourself and don't have to worry about anyone. So you can, because conferences in America is very exhausting. You start at 8:30 and you end, like midnight or whatnot.
Yes.
And you have to figure out what day you can do that
Mm-hmm.
and set your priority. And it's okay if you don't hit everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. I once went to a social media convention, social media world out in San Diego, and they said, you're going to be networking a lot. Don't worry if you can't make all the panels. We record them. So if you need to breathe and go take a nap during those, that's okay, right? Like they knew already, like we will record all of these. You can watch them at a later time as part of it because we want this first and foremost to be a space where you to connect with other people
Yeah.
and you're going to be talking a lot.
And part of my job is also set up the meetings for a lot of my creative
Mm-hmm.
leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And I always ask what is important to them. And if it's very important to them, but there is some other priorities, I think one of them, one of the leaders said she wanted to attend the session where they talk about how they overcome and keep the game going during the Ukraine war.
Oh.
And right before that, I actually had a meeting set up at the same time, which is quite important. But I set up another meeting before that so she won't miss out too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one of the founder is will be in the Ukrainian panel, so I got her to meet the person,
Yeah.
which is part of the panel.
Mm-hmm.
So when she left, I had the meeting, but then I update her afterwards.
Mm-hmm. That's a thoughtful way. Again, like how do I see and recognize their needs and how do I support them in that as that next step?
Correct.
Mm.
And also, when I come into a project, some project only heard of very glamorous external partners, but they are very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they are doing exploratory ventures that might not work with certain high volume external partners.
Sure.
So I will set it up in a way where they can work with a smaller teams with a very customized approach. But it has to be only a certain length of time
Mm.
because those are more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Usually the high volume are cheaper, but if you don't have good documentation or you don't even know what your style is, what direction are you going to go, that might end up you might end up spending more money than a very high quality 6 months with the exploratory North American companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Trying to go through that. What do we really need? Let's let's slow down this process to assess everything first before we
Yes.
just dive right in. Mm.
Yeah. So
Mm.
that's different ways of doing art outsourcing,
Mm.
but you have to set it up very strategically.
Okay. Well, let's keep that in the second half as well as we get ready to take our 5 minute break. I really love the conversation, the direction we've been going with this. It's so thoughtful as we recognize each step of the way our experiences, where we also make room for understanding and the needs of others' experiences and what
Yeah.
they're going through. This is a really beautiful insight that you're providing us. So we're going to just take a 5 minute break, friends, and then we'll come back, get your bio break, grab some water, and then we'll be returning with some good conversation about inclusivity, working with outsourcing. So we'll see you all there. right, friends, we are back. We are here with Shiew Yeu having a wonderful conversation as we're talking about now the challenges in the gaming industry as we work towards creating diverse and inclusive spaces. And Shiew Yeu, you have a particularly unique position in outsourcing, right? And how many different types of cultures we talk about. So I know we talked about this a little off screen, but I wanted to bring this on screen as well. Of course, we know that there's different countries and cultures that come from this, but when you think of cultures, what are the different types of cultures that you see existing simultaneously in workplaces, and how we might even belong to multiple cultures at once?
And so, to give you a context, I actually live in an immigrant city.
Mm-hmm.
Social economy is much lower.
Mm-hmm.
So, even just Daly City and San Francisco and Silicon Valley, there are different cultures already.
Yeah.
And also, you talking about generation gaps. Just between my daughter, who is 18, and my son is 16, there is a gap already.
Mm-hmm.
And then
They speak two different languages than each other, right? Like it's not the same.
completely different. And then there's different personality and there's different
Mm-hmm.
needs and people who have went through and seen a lot compared to people who are from a more blessed and protected background. So you have to teach them to see, and the other side, you have to teach them uh, priorities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Oh, and that's such an easy conversation to have as well, right? Of course, it never goes wrong.
And some of my last few jobs, a lot of my work, I said, is to do spring cleaning. I started the industry as an artist, and you use Photoshop, Maya, whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even open Photoshop anymore. I don't even open Maya. And my friends like, then what do you do?
Yeah. These tools that have been your lifeblood for so long, you're like, what are they?
Yeah, performers and whatnot.
Yeah. So what's your
You can,
tool of choice now?
yeah. So my tool of choice now is Google Meet.
Ooh. Fair, fair.
In this day and time, it's Google Meet.
Yeah, yeah.
Google Meet and Google Docs and a lot of Excel
Mm.
sheets. Uh, what I do is I actually come in and do a lot of observation and understanding the objective, the goal, and the needs.
Mhm.
I also find a lot of gray area or a lot of blind spots. This way, I can teach the team how to create a mature pipe framework that is sustainable and scalable over the span of time and time zones.
Mhm. Yeah, so let's talk about those time zones, right? And coordinating with people because, of course, there's the initial challenge that you're working with some people who are staying up late and others who are waking up very early. And then there's a few lucky ones of like, yes, this is a normal work hour for me, right? And trying to coordinate and create on top of it clear communication, right? Because I will say, when you're talking to morning caustic versus 5 p.m. caustic, those are two very different caustics, and my note taking skills and memory are going to be on different levels, right? On top of course, language barriers that we might have, educational barriers,
Right.
company familiarity and jargon that might limit it, right? So, what's that like of saying, like, yes, how do we get alignment with everyone here?
So, when was doing outsourcing, my first 10 to 12 years was with Asia. So, uh, Eastern Asia and Southeast Asia will come online around 5 or 6.
Mhm,
India and the rest of the others will come online around 9.
mhm.
Eastern Europeans, I will online 7 o'clock in the
Oh,
morning.
hi.
There is a sweet spot where it's between California, 4 to 6 o'clock,
Yeah.
where South America is 2 hours ahead and done with the day, but Asia is not online yet.
Like, let's time it out right.
So I think the one of the hardest job was my last job my immediate team is North and South Americans and Eastern Europeans.
Mm.
And then my client is in Asia.
Oh, okay. Naturally. I love that combination of a little of everything. You just need Antarctica somehow in the mix.
Yeah. But when I was working for Sims, most of my partners are in Asia. And I would actually make sure I wake up at 5:30, make sure everything's done at home, go to work, leave at 4:30, take care of home. But when I leave at 4:35, I would send my reviews or any emails. And after I put my kids to bed at 10:30 every single day, I will check in with them. This means they just came back from their lunch, but they have the whole morning to look at my email, my reviews. If they have any question, I can unblock them during that time. So sometimes I will share screen. Back then we used Skype. There's no Slack.
Yeah.
I-
The evolution of
yeah.
technology.
Now, actually, I was the only one that have a camera to talk to the external partners.
Oh.
And the rest of the dev team didn't want to talk to them because it's cumbersome for them. So during COVID, I put them in front. Now you have a camera, you can talk.
Everyone has a camera. Everyone can turn on and have a part in this conversation. Yes.
So talking about time zones and cultural gaps, sometimes what happens is when you don't have a face to put to a name, you get upset really easily. You don't understand the context. You don't know where that person is coming from. I remember back then at EA, my ex manager, he still talk about this like a joke about himself. He's making fun of himself. He said he came to work, and at the time we were using shotgun, now called short grid, and everything was set up wrong. And he came to the daily meeting and complained about the external partner. So I went on my WeChat to check what happened to the producer. And sure enough, she is a person who only lives 5 minutes from her office, but she works more than 12 hours a day. And that week her son was sick, but he has finals at school. So she would take care of him and she will go to work and work until the morning time. And then, of course, she was so fatigued, that was some mistake.
Yeah.
So I told my manager that. And then this is his word. He's like, now I feel like an asshole.
Fair, probably appropriate, like, yeah, you kind of were. You know what? I appreciate that he owns up to it, like, yeah. I mean, in all fairness, he didn't have that information, but he spoke without that information.
And during COVID, I was an art manager for Wall Dragon, but one of our partners are in India. But during COVID, you cannot stay in the city. So a lot of them went home to the village where it doesn't have Wi-Fi or anything at all. They only have the data from their phone. But they know that I was advocate of turning the camera on during Google Meet. And I was very adamant. So during the kickoff meeting, the artists from India did not turn on their camera. And after a few weeks, there were some things there was some shortcoming in the quality, but they were done on time. So the internal team actually made a bit of a complaint. So I actually said to them, and then they complained, and then the other guys complained, and then they complained some more, and then someone said something about the camera, and then finally I said, hey, look, they're not in America, they're in the village. In order to talk to us, they were using their personal data plan that they pay themselves to come online to be in that kickoff meeting. And on top of COVID, there was a flash flood in India. And it doesn't matter just the disease of the COVID, and the disease were brought all around by the flood.
Right.
So they were dealing with a lot. but they manage to submit your stuff on time.
There's on top of everything, where we might say, you know what, this is a bit of a crisis. You should not worry about this. They're still hitting deadlines. It's not perfect, but they're still hitting deadlines.
Yes.
What a good
So
reminder to engage with
yeah.
compassion first.
So a lot of times I see myself as because the person is not in the room, I
Right.
it's not great to say something that is belittling someone that is not in the room. And since you cannot see from what they are doing, well, maybe after you find out what they are doing, they're actually lazy,
Yeah.
okay, fine. Then we have some ways of dealing with that because, I have to deal with that too.
Yeah.
But if they are hardworking, they just didn't know because the documentation didn't list it. Is it our fault first?
Hmm.
I always say, is it our fault? Is our documentation didn't list it? Was it not clear? Was the review very confusing?
Hmm. Hmm.
If all of the things are done and then they are still bad, okay, let's talk about it. We'll
Hmm.
put them on PIP, which is like a grace period. If you don't do well, then we are not moving forward with you.
Yes.
But if they are still hitting somewhat the mark and there is potential improvement, maybe we just have to iron out some hiccups in terms of communication or whatnot, then let's continue.
Hmm.
It's harder to train out someone from ground zero instead of improving someone who you're already working with.
Hmm. I love that. But it also makes sure that we ground ourselves first. I love that you mentioned, like, hold on, let me check my own process. Is there something I can do that's going to help them out? Maybe I forgot this little documentation here, or they didn't know that they were supposed to meet this expectation. Instead of allowing that resentment or those little complaints start to pop up, it's like, wait, did I do something that would allow them to think that behavior was okay? And then having those conversations. And because we see that sometimes of our unwillingness maybe to have those direct conversations, or we just complain, we're like, that's just how it is, versus having a very open conversation of like, how do we find a solution together?
Right.
What can that
And a
look
lot of times when I put a face in front of the creative team,
like? Hmm.
they actually soften how they deliver their negative message because they saw a human being on the other side.
Yeah.
And then when the external partner explained their context, why they did what they did, because of the limitation, then you're like, oh, okay, that's not what I thought.
Hmm.
90% of it is like that. I did have external partner who really didn't hit the mark, and I have to let some of them go.
Yeah.
But 90% of the time is a mutual thing. That's why I always ask for a retrospect meeting where
Mm-hmm.
the partners will come to us with what we did well, what needs to be improved, and then we show the partner the same thing.
Hmm.
But I always let the partner go first.
Yeah.
Tell us what we need to improve first.
Yeah. As I ask of you, first I will do, sort of demonstrating the willingness and the attitude to take in that kind of thing. But I also love that, again, like, you've made it part of the process. There's a lot of companies out there, again, outside of the gaming space, but inside as well, that say, like, we love honest conversations, right? We're always open for feedback, but then they don't actually build it into their process, right? Like saying that we've got review meetings, right? We build it in, like, after every project, we have a talk where we have these honest conversations. You share what we can improve, we share back with you. And by standardizing it, it feels a little bit less of personal attacks and more of like, of course,
Correct.
this is how we
Yes.
work here.
And on top of that, I asked them to do it in a PowerPoint because
Mm.
visual speaks louder than just talking.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when you talk in English and you get so passionate and you talk faster, the people outside of America cannot catch up.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes some virtual meetings, someone needs to translate.
Yeah.
You
So,
have to pause so that they can translate.
yes, let them
And then
process,
they,
because it's not word for word exactly. They have to get the
yeah,
idea and then
yes.
convey the idea. Mm.
And then on top of that, I also asked them to think about when they reply, they are thinking in their mother language first,
Mm.
and then they directly translate it into English.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes when I look for external partners, I look for how they speak English. I also test them with an American joke. If they laugh, they pass the test.
Let's test these waters out. See if it works. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. But
What's your
sometimes
go-to joke then?
I can't remember. But a lot of times, the one who passed the test told me they watch Friends. That was the funniest thing. At least six people told me that, and not just from China, Eastern
Mhm,
Europe too.
mhm, mhm,
And also, I asked them to think about how not the point of contact when the artists are trying to speak.
mhm,
They are thinking in their mother tongue and then speaking English, so they're very direct.
mm,
So when you talk back to them, be very direct. Don't do the honey coding that Californians are used to because it doesn't make sense to them.
mhm.
And also, they don't do well with sarcasm and they don't do well with colloquial.
Mm.
And then what is like you hit it out of the ballpark, and my artist went, I don't play ball.
Yeah. Is that a good thing? I don't know. That's not for me.
But I also have to explain to my North American team that a lot of culture outside North America are highly hierarchical,
Mm,
and we are not their only client. They
mhm,
have local clients too. So you have to give them permission to have open communication and not feel like uh they're gonna have punishment
mhm.
if they say something not perfect.
Yes.
Some companies they will not show you their artists because they might bring the reputation of the company down. But if you ask for it, expect a certain procedure and uh, expect a way where you can still keep the artist safe no matter what they say.
Mm,
What we are looking for is not for a long term relationship. I'm looking for someone who can think proactively
mhm,
and make creative decision confidently when we are not around.
mhm.
We don't want a robot just going through instructions. That is actually not good enough, especially for early game development project. We
Mm,
need somebody to help us think. Uh, they might even think and come up with better idea than us
yeah.
because for a service provider, they are dealing with so many different kind of project, so many different kind of client. They actually improve a lot faster than someone who is in the client side on the dev team who, let's say I work in Sims for 14 years. That's
Yeah.
all I know. I don't know anything else.
Mhm, mhm.
It sounds glamorous because I work for electronic art, but my service provider, they're dealing with Ubisoft, this, that, local client, and then
Mhm.
everything is different. They have to switch from one style to another, so they grow faster and improve faster than I did.
Oh, yes. But you don't think of that. But yeah, looking for those resources, especially on that creative side of like, what are your inspirations? What playgrounds are you given that you get to stretch those skills versus are you making the same thing every single time kind of process?
Perfect.
Mm,
And so a lot of times I ask my American team not to show so much of their ego.
mm-hmm,
Not that they do, but sometimes they don't know that they did
mm,
because they are so used to talking just with their American coworkers.
yes.
And well, for example, external partners who are from China, if you are an artist, it's illegal for you to have an internet.
Oh.
So one of my art director went, "Why don't you just search it on Google?" I'm like, first of all,
Well,
there's no Google in China.
yeah, yeah. That's true. Like, but those are things you wouldn't think of because here everyone has it all the time. You use Google for the dumbest things. Like some people
Yeah,
will even Google basic math problems at this point
correct.
instead of doing it. Like, okay, what's 56 plus 12, right? Like instead of doing it in their head, they just Google it, even avoiding the calculator on their app because Google is the first thing on so many
Yes,
people's
that
phones or
North American goes to.
yes.
But in China, their social media are filtered.
Mm,
And also, if you want exactly a certain style,
mm-hmm,
you have to provide all the reference.
mm,
Don't expect them to go with just one reference and is able to go from A to Z
mm-hmm,
if you didn't provide a clear direction.
yes.
And second of all, if we actually found out their artists have internet access, we will block them from and we will cancel the contract. they will actually have to pay a lot of monetary compensation.
Really?
It is illegal, especially for large corporate.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So making sure that you're
Yeah.
protecting them in those
So,
interactions. Yeah. Right. That's fair.
and for other countries, it doesn't make sense for them to, they cannot afford a triple A game.
Yeah.
It is their more than their monthly salary.
Yes.
And buying a console is more like their yearly salary.
Mm-hmm.
So you cannot go, well, just go buy a new few games and try it. I'm like,
Yeah.
not affordable, my dear.
Yeah. Yeah. This is
Or
you're talking to
the
a different world at this point.
simplest thing is, why don't you know Maya? Because they cannot afford it. They know Blender.
Yes. Yes. But that's such an important point. And when we think about like the economical differences
Correct.
that come into play, it's like don't you can't be unaware of these
Correct.
situations.
And when you say it to an American, it makes sense. Hey, why don't you just search up Google, you lazy person?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the rest of the world is different.
But and it takes such an international awareness too. So I imagine when you start working with a team, even on your own end, there is some thought and research of making sure like what are some of those cultural differences? What
Yes.
are going to be the technology gaps that we have to adjust for? What might be language considerations we have or even holidays that we will need to work around, right?
Correct.
Yeah, because there's a lot more of saying like, yeah, all
Yeah.
right, we're just going to work with them, they'll figure it out and tell us what they need. That's not going to be the
That
case.
was a really funny. He meant well. They meant well.
Hmm.
Some of the international holiday for a certain culture, like Chinese, has their version of Day of the Dead, but
Yeah.
it's not. Chinese see death as a more, you know, not as celebration as
Yes.
Latinos.
It's a little more somber.
So it's more somber. So it's called the sweeping the tomb day.
Hmm.
Well, they because my team was trying to be diverse, they would say, "Oh, Happy Luna New Year" or whatnot,
Yeah.
and then we go, "Happy sweeping the tomb day." I'm like, "What the hell?"
Oh no. Stop that. Delete. Can we unsend that email, please? Delete that Slack message.
No,
Oh gosh. That's like happy
I know
funeral
trying to
day.
be
No.
like, that. No, sorry,
No, there's
bring that back.
especially bless their hearts, like they probably sent like a little gif along with it, like a little heart around it. You're like, no, no, you mean well, but you do not understand the sentiment around this holiday.
And also in America, we say Lunar New Year because not just Chinese are celebrating, Vietnamese and Koreans
Hmm.
are also celebrating it.
Yes.
But in certain part of the world, they only have Chinese.
Hmm.
So they would say Happy Chinese New Year.
Yes.
Is this not wrong?
Yes. Yeah.
They're not trying to exclude anyone. There is no
Mm-mm.
Korean or,
Yeah, and they're
Vietnamese in that
yeah,
country.
their country, their
They
town, their
are,
village where they're at, it's just in China, right? Like
have someone corrected somebody else in Lunar New Year, and then the external part is like, wait, what? I'm like,
you can't do that for other people.
like in Malaysia, where I come from, you
Mm,
say Chinese New Year
yeah.
because I know that some Korean but there is not. There are so few of them.
Yes.
It is just doesn't make sense to say
Hmm.
Lunar New Year. No one will like. They'll just look at you
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what?
Well,
What are you talking about?
it's recognizing again like that's another cultural difference, right? Like
Correct.
you're not that's
Correct.
not the same thing. Like we call it Chinese New Year. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
it makes sense for that region. So if you are addressing that region, do it the way that those people are dealing with it.
Hmm.
And some things are very religious and it's very sacred to a certain culture.
Hmm.
And for Americans, we are not as religious as we used to be.
Hmm.
But that doesn't, it's not the case for the rest of the world.
Right. Right.
And like, let's say Ramadan, that is a very, very personal journey.
Hmm.
And when people are going through fasting during Ramadan, they actually get a little tired
Hmm.
and they don't go out to lunch with you
Yeah.
because they're fasting.
It's a little less fun for some reason, you know?
But they at the evening they will open fast and it's a celebration, but they
Yes.
have to wait till sunset.
Hmm.
So when you want to eat with them, you wanted to do
Yeah.
it after sunset.
Yeah. It's not happy hour. You got to even wait a little long, depending. Yeah.
Yeah, and then yeah, so there are different things. And then uh, when you go out with Muslim, don't order anything to do with pork.
Hmm.
And people's like, I'm not ordering pork, and I say salami is pork,
Yes. But
and
it's
they're like, it is.
yes. There is an awareness issue. And it's fine that you've been in your life and you can kind of go away with thinking salami must be its own animal for some reason. What do you think it is? Like a
The
weasel?
animal
I don't
doesn't
know.
exist. And then with most Hindu, it's don't order beef or
Hmm.
ask them, is it okay if I eat beef while
Hmm.
you eat something else? Is it okay for you? You know, it's very courteous,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
And for Americans, I have never met anyone who's allergic to peanut growing up in America.
Hmm.
I mean, growing up in Malaysia. It's
Hmm.
only when I came here, I noticed there are a lot of people who are allergic to peanut. They have eczema. I have never seen it in Malaysia.
Hmm.
And I also noticed in Malaysia growing up, farm to table was what we know how to do.
That was not a trend. It is it.
It was not a trend. Buying processed food was very expensive. Only
Hmm.
rich people go to the supermarket.
Mm.
But now that's big supermarket in Malaysia.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, it was not.
Hmm. Yeah.
It was only for the privileged.
Hmm.
So I noticed I didn't have those disease, me and my friend growing up. But in America, there was a lot of those. Oh, I'm allergic to this. I'm gluten, this.
Lactose
Like,
intolerant. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I have. Well, Asian have lactose intolerant. That
Yes.
was very common in our genetic.
Mm.
But gluten-free things, I have never seen.
Hmm.
So things like that is me trying to understand my American friends.
Hmm.
What are they able to handle or what they're not?
Yes. Yes. What a process. Because I mean, again, when we're thinking about how do we build culture, sometimes we do simple things of, just eating out, right?
Yes,
Ordering in
eating out.
food from the office, or we do work lunches. Even if we're remote, people will eat while they're doing a Zoom meeting or a Google Meet meeting. And it's being thoughtful of, what am I showing that I'm eating as well in that process. It's small things, but it's trying to be proactive in our
Yes,
awareness. Now, this is a lot of culture in of course the teams themselves, but of course there's also culture in how it portrays in the artwork. What is
it
it
is.
like to talk about of not only how are we working on the conversation of diversity of our team, but the diversity and representation in the work itself?
I have a lot to talk about. I could
Yeah.
take it home.
You could lead a lecture class on this topic alone. Yes, yes. The short and short of it all as best we can.
So, being in the industry for 20 years, the
Hmm.
first time I see diversity and inclusion was only around 2016. I think the first FIFA cover was a woman. And because the women won the World Cup
Yes.
at Electronic Arts, they would put the game cover on the vending machine.
Hmm.
So I remember going to work and I saw the cover of this vending machine. It was a woman. At the time, if it's a woman on the cover, she's like a sex object or she's
Yes.
very explicitly
Posing with a sword in a seductive way, right?
in a
Like, yeah,
very high
we've
split,
seen the outfits of
very
armor that
small waist.
is.
But this is just a regular woman who won, like a real life woman who
Hmm.
won the
Hmm.
World Cup. And I stood there for 5 minutes just staring at her. I'm like, that's a woman.
Yeah.
And after that, Electronic Arts start putting women on the cover of wrestling,
Hmm.
UFC. Uh, that was Battlefront, the Star Wars.
Yes.
She was the American-born Indian,
Hmm.
and I actually met her. They invited her to be a fireside chat, and she talked about being a Indian in the Hollywood scene.
Hmm.
And also, uh battlefield,
Mm-hmm.
not front but field. They
Yes.
put a wood in the front.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the core gamer went was really angry, and the CEO said, "If you don't like my game, you don't have to play it."
Yeah.
But the woman was in the front
Which,
cover.
which is so crazy because it's on the cover, but suddenly it became problematic. And it makes me
Yeah,
think of like how the representation is and how long it took for us. Like the fact that when you first saw for FIFA, it took the women's team winning the World Cup,
yeah.
right?
To put them on the cover.
Yes. To start this final tidal wave that had been holding back of guess what? Women can probably be in many of these roles.
So when diversity and inclusion started for the gaming world, they're like, "Oh, we gotta diversify the character." So they put ladies in kimonos and Shiba gods in the game, and I was like,
What an attempt. What a terrible, terrible attempt. Like, where do you begin? Like, do you want to start off with, like, what were you thinking?
I'm like, let me take this over. Thank you. I remember when Chinese New Year they never mind. I move on.
Like, I have a few constructive notes for you. And you, like, slide a small packet of like 100 pages of feedback.
And then so when American and North American developers were trying to do diversity and inclusion, they
Mm-hmm.
would go to their regular external partners.
Yes.
They forgot that the rest of the world do not look at diversity and inclusion the same way they do.
Mm.
For example, in Japan, where everyone's Japanese, what does diversity look like?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To them, it's a social economy and gender. In India, where everybody's Indian, it's religion and the caste system, and there are a lot of things. That's even micro within the caste system. There are
Mm.
many things. Even in a metropolitan area, when the caste is not a problem, it's a social economy. What
Mm.
car are you driving? Which neighborhood do you live in? In Malaysia, it's really funny when you bring a partner home, potential partner.
Yeah.
Your parents would not ask how much. Well, sometimes they will ask how much he made, but they will sometimes ask, so where do your parents live? Which neighborhood?
Mm-hmm. It's a predictive test. That's what it is. Yes. Like, it's
Yes,
not
it's
where
not
you are
very
now.
good.
Your parents are going to tell us where you're going to be in your life.
Yes.
Yes.
But so the diversity and inclusion is very different. And also your skin color. The lighter you are, the higher of a privilege you have.
Mm-hmm.
I was born very dark skinned, so I was very ugly growing up.
Oh,
But when I came to
poor
America, they
you.
loved me because I always was born with a tan. I don't have to sit outside for 2 hours.
But it's such a different perspective. You're like, yes, this is how I am here,
For me
you
to
know?
stay on this side of the planet.
Yes.
So that when we come to diversity and inclusion, when my team was sending things to Asia, the characters that came back look like they just have a plastic surgery. It doesn't look like Asian to Americans, and we are like, something wrong. It looks like manga character.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm like,
yeah, okay. All right. I've seen this before in my anime. Got it. Okay.
so I had to actually take out some of the diverse, and some countries you cannot go ask them to do LGBTQ,
Mm, yeah.
or they it's uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's hard too because even that's layered. One, right? Like even the individuals on that end, they're not part of your team. Those conversations may not be something experiences that they've had, or even
Yeah,
if they are, they may work for a company or in a country where that's
e-
not a
and
safe
even if they
conversation.
would do it for you because you are the client
Yes.
and you're paying them money, they
Yes.
don't understand. It's really hard to explain a binary character
Mm-hmm.
to someone outside of North America.
Mm.
Though some culture do have those people, but they are very exclusive
Yes.
and trans, and it's just very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
In India, there is a culture where it is the whole tribe is transgender.
Mm-hmm.
It's two-edged sword. They in the ancient time, the royalties will ask them to come to perform some very a certain culture that's very sacred for them. But in
Mm-hmm.
order to be part of that community,
Mm-hmm.
you have to disown your past,
Oh.
um, your family, your past self, and you are reborn into. You are not yourself. You cannot say I'm so and so son or
Mm.
something.
What an
But
isolating experience to go through such a
yeah,
process like that. But
but
yeah, so
we
we can see how it's very exclusive.
yeah, it's very exclusive, and they carry a certain culture, like the
Mm-hmm.
dance, a certain you know it's a lot of things that is only this people would do.
Mm-hmm.
But in the bigger scheme of things, binary are not very common in outside of North America.
Mm-hmm.
And in some countries, well, I'm from Malaysia. I don't know how to explain binary to my mother.
Yeah. Yeah. It,
But in America, it's easy.
yes.
Uh, you know, so I kept all the diversity and inclusion character in North America
Mm-hmm.
and some part of Eastern European where our culture is almost similar.
Mm-hmm.
But even with that, we have to do a lot of explanation. So I find the process was easier with the North Americans.
Mm-hmm.
The most important thing is a lot of people outside of North America have never seen African American before. They
Mm-hmm.
only seen them on TV and movies and posters and magazines.
Mm-hmm.
They have if you have not seen an African American in person,
Mm-hmm.
there is a lot of details about how to render them that you don't have.
Yeah. And you don't want to do it poorly, right? This is where
Yeah.
representation matters. We want to make sure it's great quality. We recognize
Plus,
textures and lighting changes.
things you see on the magazine and the movies are very staged.
Mm-hmm.
So, and for African American, their hair is their glory. But it's actually really, 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 really difficult to deal with the African American ladies' hair.
Mm-hmm.
They take just putting on an extension will take 8 to 9 hours.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter's mentor at her high school is like her second mom.
Mm-hmm.
She honestly told me that when she was pregnant and found out she's going to give birth to a girl, she cried.
Mm-hmm.
She don't even want to deal with her own hair. She actually cut it short. Now she has to deal with her daughter's hair, and she's like, it's so expensive, so on and so forth. But it looks fantastic.
Yeah.
Her daughter's hair always looked beautiful. Her
Yes.
hair, she cut it short, almost bald.
She can make her own choice, but for her daughter, she's like, okay, we'll go all
But
in
they're
for you.
also very expensive. It's a
Yeah.
few $100s.
Mm-hmm.
And they put so much work into it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't even put your effort into rendering it correctly,
Yeah.
they get really offended.
Mm-hmm. It's a
So,
disservice, right?
yes,
It's a poor copy that doesn't figure genuine when we see so many other cultures or identities being represented better.
correct. So I did ask my team not to send certain characters to Asia
Mm-hmm.
because they have never seen them before
Mm-hmm.
and they cannot go online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They
And that
can only
recognizes the
send them so
limited of the
many references.
experience.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes. But those are challenges you wouldn't think like, okay, well, if I send them enough reference points, it should be fine. But you don't want fine opportunities and you don't want to set a teen up for failure on that end. And it's
correct.
recognizing, right, societally, right, those are different conversations than what we can achieve right now professionally and what I'm hiring the studio to do.
And also you have a hard deadline, so you need to make sure you have enough time to make those character
Mm-hmm.
that is tastefully represented.
Mm, yes. Yes. I guess that's the next question, right? Like as we go through it, like it's not just making sure there's the visual representation is correct. Like when we look at the variety of skin tones, even face shapes, right? Hairstyles that we have.
Another thing is animation.
Mm,
So when you tell an Asian, oh, do this,
mm-hmm,
you, if you are talking about a very stylized animation that Disney characters are very used to, you have to show them. You
mm,
cannot say a certain thing and expect them because certain cultures don't have a lot of animation.
yeah.
They survive on having a poker face.
Mm, mm-hmm,
For example, in communist time, you cannot show different uh, expression, or else people will be very jealous of you because you're either doing better than them or whatnot. But in certain Eastern European country like and Russia, having a certain too much of an expression means that you're still a child. That means you're very silly.
Oh no. Well.
Why are you smiling?
Oh no, we are quite childish, aren't we?
So you have to make a lot of explanation and
Mhm.
set the expectation correctly
Yeah.
before you outsource or do all this thing. Because animation and movement and facial expression looks very different in different culture.
Mhm.
And it means very different things.
Mm.
In America, North America, you come to someone and smiling.
Yeah.
In certain culture, that means if I'm a woman, that means I'm trying to hit on you or something.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's very, very different.
Yeah, and trying to read into it. Or even when we say smile, right? Like there's so many different ways someone can
Yes.
smile, right? Like you can do half smiles, full smiles. I once told a preschool class like the more teeth you show, the happier you are. And that was a bad day because I told them that on picture day and then they got a lot of interesting pictures back from parents. A lot of showing of teeth. But that's right. The challenge of when we think about how do we, because our initial reference point is always going to be first ourselves. Like when I say I want to make this character smile, we might first mimic like, how do I smile? How do I then
Right.
convey that out, right? Or how do I see the person I look at most and how they smile? Those are going to be natural inspirations that we bring into our work. So I think that's a really good point to think about how we pull in and look for inspiration, but also work with recognizing those barriers and challenges
Yeah,
where that inspiration isn't going to be there to get us to the art creation that this game
correct.
needs. Hmm.
Correct. And a lot of times when I engage with an external partner, I also gauge how much exposure they have to a Western world.
Mm.
And when we talk about diversity and inclusion, I actually did a virtual presentation to a few Chinese, a large Chinese animation company.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was showing things like Target advertisement with a Down syndrome model,
Mm-hmm.
or Victoria's Secret runway with the plus size model,
Yeah.
or, to them,
Mm-hmm.
those are not someone they will put on their billboard.
Mm.
And that was a big silence. But the objective of the presentation was to show them why Western developer are doing what they are doing and going into the direction they're going.
Mm-hmm.
We want someone that our players can connect with.
Mm-hmm.
It might be a warrior, but he happens to be a Hispanic,
Mm-hmm.
or she is a sorcerer, but she happens to be a Muslim.
Yes.
But she might have a hijab, but she can have a wand or whatnot.
Yeah, her big staff and
Yes.
yes.
And my friend worked on episodes, and they made a conservative but very stylish outfits,
Mm-hmm.
swimming cocktail dresses, swimming outfits
Mm-hmm.
for the Muslim community, so they can still express themselves,
Yes.
but they don't have to go against their religious belief.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the beautiful parts that we can see out of culture and creativity coming together is
Yes,
we don't keep seeing the same outfits or the same kind of people,
correct.
right? We get beauty, we get inspiration, we get, the celebration of all that we are, of everyone
And
that we are.
I was trying to explain to my North American friends, certain cultures are very realistic.
Mm-hmm.
They put a lot of priority on how they look
Mm-hmm.
and the materialistic part of things that a lot of people in Silicon Valley don't care about and that show up in their t-shirt at work.
Well,
That culture, if you don't present yourself in a certain way, you don't get a certain respect.
yeah, yeah. And that's disheartening. I,
It is disheartening, but it's a reality that
yes.
they have to go through and we don't.
Yes. Yes. I think that's a really valid point of like just when you're in these spaces, it's important to know. Now, for companies, how much art is actually outsourced typically? when we look at
So
these
for a live
techniques.
game and a live movies,
Hmm.
if you wait until the end of the movies and look at all the credits, sit
Hmm.
until the end. That's why Marvel movie has a snippet at the end
Yeah. To keep you so that way you
because
actually see everyone.
yeah, it's to pay respect to all the people that worked
Yes.
on it. 60 to 80% of the art content are outsourced. Only the first off are done in house.
Hmm. That's so
Like
beautiful.
for Sims,
Hmm.
when I was called a trader because I outsource everything, and I said to them, the things I outsource, you don't even want to do.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
want to do a bunch of windows and doors that have to deal with internal and external lighting, and then build everything cut in half,
Hmm.
and then attach different materials to them
No,
a
no one would
hundred
do that.
times. I'll give it to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that's not the exciting part. Okay. I want to work on the pretty things. I want to work on the exciting things, not like your standard windows and walls.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's such a realization that people don't realize when they watch the games, they view the films and all of that. Now, we're so close on running out of time here, and I wish we could talk so much further about this. So I want us to end on a final topic point here when we're talking about all this work, right? And we recognize that there are going to be challenges. And you even mentioned earlier, right? Like when we go through this, we need to ground ourselves. What's most important for us? Because so many of us are striving for protection, or not protection, perfection on that end. Especially thinking for those in their own workplaces as we want to do good work where we are. How do we balance that approach of wanting to be top tier, perfect in our work, while also making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, we're acknowledging the realities of situations, and giving ourselves grace and those around us grace?
And the hardest thing a perfectionist can ever do is to forgive themselves and give them not themselves enough thresholds to do trial and error.
Mm,
So a lot of times I would tell them the first few sprint are to make mistakes.
mm,
So when you find a mistake, it's actually a success.
mhm,
I rather you find it during the first 6 months than when we launch the game.
mhm,
We are still learning to work with each other and figure out what our directions are. We are bound to make mistakes.
mhm,
That's why we have to have open communication and talk to each other. As a leader, you should always figure out what your team is like and create a safe environment so that they can be effective,
mhm,
safe and effective.
mhm,
That is different for everyone. Some people might need certain things and others might need something else.
mhm,
But as long as they feel safe and they have the right tools and information to be effective, then as a leader, my job is done well. It's a lot of times in America, I tell people being a leader is a servants of the people.
mhm,
We are not kings here. This is not a hierarchical culture.
mhm.
You are actually here to help others do their job. You're not here for yourself.
Yeah. But that's such an important approach, right? Because as we move into leadership positions, right, there's so much ability to influence, to set standards, right? You even mentioned like no one goes home until the manager goes home, right? When you are overseeing teams, you set the standards of what is important. And I love that you open up the door to say, listen, risks are going to happen. That's part of the game, right? That shouldn't be the surprise. And that gives us a lot more breathing space because especially individuals who are first starting out, right? There's the idea of like, yes, I want to know, I know everything, I'm prepared for this, everything I do is perfect. And that's supposed to be seen as good work or being a good
Yeah.
worker.
So I tell people that I'm a if I an effective leader is
Mm-hmm.
not because I'm a perfect leader, but I'm there when they needed me.
Mm-hmm.
Just like when I'm a mother, I they see me fall. I went through a lot of things in my life, and they see me hit the rock bottom, but they also see me stand up from my ashes. But I don't think I was a bad mother until I give up being the mother.
Mm-hmm.
Same with a leader.
Mm-hmm. Yes, to keep going, to keep learning and that growth. That's such a great reminder of just when we have those mistakes, right? Like we get to learn from them. that when we choose not to learn from them, that's really the mistake we can't come back from.
There are a lot of people that I mentor that I have already closed their mind to new ideas.
Mm.
And they were hitting a place where I learned enough. I'm happy where I am. And they're in their 20s. And I'm like, what?
That's it. You've maxed out.
I'm 47. I'm still
Yeah,
learning.
yeah. Like, oh, how they figure that out? Maybe we should flip the mentorship. How did you get at 20 to be content where you are?
So there were people that it's easier for me to teach.
Mm.
And there are people that it's really, really hard for me to teach them. I have to find different ways for them to have the opportunity. And sometimes that window is very quick.
Mhm. Ooh. Mm. I think that's actually a really great note for us to wrap in for today, just because it's a good reminder for all of us to think of ourselves of how are we approaching situations? Are we continually learning? Are we opening ourselves up for those opportunities to improve, to make mistakes and be willing to learn from them? Are we seeking out mentors like yourself, right? That we're putting and taking advantage of the wonderful support network that we have around us to help us improve, to help us become better, to be there and not give up when we fall down in those moments. I love this. Uh, Shiew Yeu, you've been absolutely amazing for us tonight. You've shared so many insights. I've loved picking your brain this evening. Where can people find you so that way they can keep following you? Like, is it LinkedIn? Where
You
can
can
we stay
reach out to
with?
me on LinkedIn
Yes.
and then say I'm from the Pink Pixel. This way, because I have a lot of people approach me for
Okay.
different things.
Mm-hmm.
Just say I saw you on Pink Pixel, so on and so forth. And then I know.
Perfect. It makes me think of like your old business cards of like, we met
Yes.
at. It just has to be that easy. But I love that. And of course, I know on LinkedIn, you can also just choose to follow people as well. So that way they can follow and see your posts and what's going on in your life. I appreciate. And again, I want to thank you so much for coming to our channel, being an amazing inspiration, and of course, being good to your own team, right? When we look at amazing women in the gaming space, we see you all as pillars. We see you all as trailblazers that are continually making this place better for more of us to enter this space. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing.
And thank you for giving me this space so that I can advocate.
Of course. Well, we're going to have to steal more time of you again in the future. But for tonight, we will go ahead and call it. Thank you again for all of your wonderful time, Shiew Yeu. And for our wonderful friends at home, thank you for tuning in. Or if you're listening to the recording later, thank you so much. Remember, come join us every Monday over on the Peak Pixels here on the Gamers channel at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're always having great conversations, more insights, continue to challenge yourself. And I hope today you are willing to take in that realization that this week, push yourself for risks. Push yourself for those learning opportunities. Take advantage of it because you can handle it. You've got the space, you've got the support, and you deserve that chance to learn. All right, friends, that's it for today. We'll see you all next week. Bye, everyone.